I have not been looking forward to making this video. No, I have. I've been looking forward to sharing everything that I've found out, but this is one of those things that's just going to be mind-numbingly frustrating. Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Gitte Marie, and in today's impact analysis video, this is going to be a self-burn. First of all, we're going to look at something that is going to annoy me, that's going to be frustrating, but that's what this channel is about. It's about examining and exploring the nuances of trying to be a more conscious consumer. There is a growing demographic of consumers that are trying to buy a little bit less or a little bit better with a little bit more care than we did before. And overall, this is a good thing, but it also makes us as consumers vulnerable. It makes us vulnerable to marketing campaigns and sneaky advertising tactics that's trying to exploit that cautious or conscious perspective of certain consumers. And the reason why it's working is because consumers want to be sustainable. We seek out the opportunity to be better versions of ourselves or to buy things that harm the planet slightly less. Today we're looking at an industry that I've been wanting to zoom in on for a really long time. Mostly because it's an industry that produces products that I love and worship every single day. I wear a lot of jewelry. I have always loved jewelry. I love my heirloom jewelry and I love buying from new, small, up-and-coming designers. I'm a jewelry girl, and the thing is, we have collectively, the human race, have been jewelry girls since the dawn of time. We have always, as in throughout the entirety of human history, used jewelry as a way of communicating with other people, as a way of expressing our individual style. It is such a deeply ingrained way of cultural and historic expression. I am not going to sit here in this video and say that you can never wear jewelry again. Also, I love it myself, but I think we owe it to the industry, to ourselves and to the planet to seek out a little bit more information as to how to be the best conscious consumer. The World Gold Council report that gold producers uncover an average of 2,500 to 3,000 tons of gold every single year. In the second half of the 20th century, gold mining production grew enormously. According to the United States Geological Survey, 80% of the gold ever brought above ground was mined since the 1910s, and about 50% of all the gold ever produced has been mined since 1967. Nearly 47% of all the mined gold is used in jewelry today. Chances are you're going to run into a retailer that is advertising recycled gold, which is what this whole video is actually about, because this is where I have some complaints. Often jewelry made from recycled materials is advertised as guilt-free, like diet culture for consumer goods. This is sort of the same thing with secondhand fashion, which we talked about in this video. A lot of this advertising is very much giving use recycled materials, have no impact. But is it really that simple? We hear recycling and we immediately think eco-friendliness. But when it comes to minerals like gold, does it really make a difference? Let's break it down. First of all, let's talk about recycling in general. We all know that recycling can help reduce waste, but not all recycling works the way that we think. Take plastic, for example. Most of it doesn't actually get turned back into the same high quality products. A plastic bottle usually isn't reborn as another bottle. It's more likely to be turned into insulation for a jacket or the stuffing in a sleeping bag. This is a process we typically refer to as downcycling, because the product is turned into a product of lesser value than before. And even then, virgin plastic is still almost always added to maintain the quality. So what about gold? The majority of the impact of gold and the majority of ethical questions that arise from gold production comes from the mining process. It's both vastly damaging to the environment and it's also vastly exploitive of human labor. Mining is not a sexy process, which means that a lot of consumers are very eager to buy into an idea that recycled silver and gold is better because it doesn't involve the mining process. But does an increased demand for recycled silver and gold reduce the demand for mining practices? Turns out, not at all, really. There's no data that shows that the demand for recycled silver and gold has decreased the demand for new mining materials. Even when consumers are increasingly so buying recycled silver and gold products, mining continues unaffected. It's actually increasing. So there's that. Gold mining is a huge industry. Large-scale companies extract almost all of it, but there's also artisanal and small-scale mining, or ASM, which makes up 90% of the workforce but only produces about 20% of the world's gold. These miners are often some of the poorest people on the planet. They work long hours, sometimes in dangerous conditions, and rely on middlemen to sell their gold, which makes them extremely vulnerable to exploitation. It is also within the supply chain that there are massive transparency issues, so there's really no way of knowing if forced labor have been used or child labor have been used, and unfortunately it's pretty safe to assume the worst. It is a very well-known phenomenon that children are smaller than adults, and as such they are very often used in mines because their smaller bodies can squeeze into places in the mines where adults simply cannot go. This is also something that we talked about in the crystals video. ASM miners often use mercury to extract gold, a toxic metal that can cause serious neurological damage and even death. Most miners don't have the resources or knowledge to use mercury safely. And this is where fair trade gold comes in. The fair trade program helps educate miners on the dangers of using mercury and how to handle the material safer. They also spread information about how to safely transition away from using mercury altogether, which we do love to see. So the result of fair trade's eco gold is actually real change for the people that work in the supply chain. Now, back to recycled gold for a second. Many jewelers, both independent as well as both smaller and bigger brands, advertise recycled gold. But what does that actually mean? The problem is that industry definitions vary all the time. No, because why would it be easy for consumers to actually know what's going on? Some industry groups defined recycled gold as gold that has been previously refined. Others say that recycled gold is gold that simply didn't come directly from a mine, which means that it could have been mined last week and then refined twice, and then technically under that definition be classified as recycled, even though I am 100% certain that that is not what consumers assume when they hear something is recycled. If I could change very few things globally, one of the things would be that we all had to use the same definition of stuff, because if there is one definition of what recycled means for gold, that would be great, but no, it's extremely murky, and what recycled means is never the same. Why would it be? My biggest problem is that recycled gold makes it sound like there is a decreasing demand for new gold. That when you buy recycled gold, it means that you are taking gold out of a waste stream instead of using new gold from mines. So if you're a conscious consumer, if you want to reduce your impact as much as possible in the easiest possible ways, you would go for something that is recycled in order to avoid the massive environmental and social impact of gold mining. That would make sense, how you would come to think that. But then you're going to be extremely discouraged by what your recycled gold actually entails. Because in reality, very limited amounts of gold is headed for landfill, is going to be wasted if not otherwise utilized. Gold has always been reused because it's an incredibly valuable material. It has never been headed for landfill after one use. Gold has never been disposable, as a lot of other materials within different kinds of recycling schemes have known to have been, like plastic, cardboard, paper, other kinds of metals. You can now recycle those and reuse those as an alternative to disposing of them after one single use, but that has never been an issue with gold. In fact, the FTC guidelines state that for something to be called recycled, it must have been recovered from a waste stream, but gold has never been waste. It's always been valuable, so it doesn't get thrown away, meaning that most claims about recycled gold reducing environmental impact doesn't really add up. It is also a marketing tactic to make the more conscious consumer feel better about buying something. Because we have such strong positive connotations with recycling, this is a term that we have now started to use with things that do not fall under the regular definition of what recycling is, which is something that has been recovered from a waste stream. Recycled gold is not a thing in the same way as other types of recycled materials, but we have always recycled gold. My quotation mark fingers are gonna be sore after this video. And since we've always repurposed, remelted gold, starting to advertise it now as recycling is nothing more than an advertising strategy, because we are not actually opting for something that we didn't do before. And this kind of communication strategy can easily end up as greenwashing. Now, I don't think that it is inherently greenwashing, but it's a gray area that is really murky to navigate, both as a consumer and as a brand. So just by using recycled gold, if we just are going to continue calling refined or remelted gold recycled gold, that is not in and of itself greenwashing, but communicating to consumers that recycled gold, or this type of recycled gold, decreases the need for mining, or that it's ethical, or that it's actually recycled according to the more so like stricter definitions. It is at best miscommunication based on a misunderstanding, and at worst it's just straight up greenwashing. It is why and how a company communicates the origin of its material that's really the major issue here. Companies and jewelers need to be more honest about how they source their materials. But I think a major problem is that a lot of the supply chains for gold and silver are extremely opaque, really difficult to navigate, also for smaller brands. And the more middlemen in a supply chain, the less transparent it is. Instead of working on improving a supply chain, we just use weird-ass greenwashing tactics in order to feel better about the materials that we're using, even though it's an incredibly imprecise way of describing the product. So I think what could be great to see from companies going forward is being more direct or more so precise in their communication, which means that if you're a small jeweler that's using remelted materials from old jewelry and creating new jewelry from those remelted materials, tell that story instead of saying recycled silver and gold. And if you're a bigger corporation that's using gold from mines, even though it's been refined a couple of times, but ultimately it still came from a mine last year, be transparent about that, please. Overall, there is a problem with labeling jewelry as made with recycled silver and gold because it implies ethical sourcing or a level of sustainability that is simply not there. There's no data to back it up. Telling a story of how you are saving a material from landfill that ultimately wasn't headed there, because gold has always been valuable and really never headed for landfill. There is one exception. If you're a company that recycles the gold in tech, in computers and smartphones, and reuses that gold in jewelry, then you get to say it's recycled, because then there is an actual chance that that gold would otherwise not have been reutilized. Then you get to say it, because then you're actually working with a waste stream. And this is one of the biggest obstacles with recycled gold. Industry groups create the standards that certify something as recycled gold. However, each one has a different definition of what constitutes recycled gold. So consumers have absolutely no way of knowing if their recycled gold jewelry is this much better for the environment and for people, or this much better. And I would guess that that is pretty important for a lot of consumers. One common definition from the Responsible Jewellery Council is that gold that has been previously refined. The other most commonly applied definition is anything that doesn't come directly from a mine, which is how the LBMA defines it. These definitions allow for a lot of ambiguity. It could mean that gold was mined last week, but stopped at an extra refinery or sat in a bank along the way to the jewelry manufacturer. There is a group called Precious Metals Impact Forum that has proposed a redefinition of recycled gold. They propose that the majority of what we call recycled gold should be called reprocessed gold, because that's actually what's happening. They're just reprocessing gold for purity, not saving gold from the landfill like most recycling we know of. The only gold that they believe should be called recycled is the gold that was diverted from a waste stream, from electronic waste. However, there is very little post-consumer gold in circulation, and very, very little of it is actually turned into jewelry. For the most part, it's still highly untraceable how much post-consumer gold is used in recycled gold. So I would assume very little, if any at all. Something that ideally should be clearly specified. Now, some bigger brands like Pandora has committed to using only recycled materials, which sounds great. They argue that it reduces carbon emissions since recycling uses less energy than mining. Using recycled silver emits 1/3 of the carbon of mined silver, and recycling gold emits less than 1% of the carbon emissions from newly mined gold. They estimate that this shift avoids 58,000 tons of CO2 every year, which is the equivalent of taking 6,000 cars off the road. But the impact of this ultimately depends on how strict they are with the definition of their recycling process. Now, as we've talked about in many an impact video, when we talk about sustainability, sustainability can be understood on various different parameters and spectrums. One part of sustainability is carbon emissions. And yes, when it typically comes to the carbon emissions from new gold versus recycled gold, there is a lot to be gained here because recycling emits a lot less CO2. But when the supply chains are so murky, it's really difficult to say anything specific about how much CO2 is actually saved, because it very much so depends on how this recycled material is sourced. Really murky, and I would just really appreciate if individual brands started breaking down the supply chain even further instead of just buying all of us out with a recycled label. Recycled gold can be a tiny bit better for the planet, or it can be vastly better. So what's the takeaway here? Recycled gold doesn't stop mining. It doesn't reduce the demand for mining to happen in the first place, which means that calling recycled jewelry more ethical is really kind of a stretch, because it has nothing to do with, or it doesn't combat or fight the main issue within the supply chain. Recycled jewelry does mean lower emissions than if you were using newer mined materials. But how much of a reduction we're looking at is really difficult to determine when we don't know the steps of the supply chain. The main thing we should be doing, I guess, is wearing our stuff for as long as possible, maintaining and repairing it if it breaks, and using things that are already within our reach or within circulation. And then we really shouldn't be settling for the fast food of advertising in sustainability, which means that if you see a brand that advertises ethical or recycled or low impact or guilt-free products, asking more questions might be a better way to move forward rather than just handing them your money. If you have any more tips or insight, leave it in the comments down below. I would love to hear you guys' perspective on this as well. And I hope you liked this video. Overall, that was it. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, there are many more where it came from. So subscribe to my channel to make sure that you're always up to date. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day, and I will see you guys next time. Take really good care of yourselves. Until then, bye.